Welcome back as we continue our discussion of Sula by Toni Morrison.
So, what's fascinating about this book is that we can sum it up extremely simply. The book tracks the friendship and its dissolution of Sula and Nell, who are two Black women living in the Bottom, which is a Black community in Ohio post World War I. So, there's your nutshell. But there is so much more going on. And, like you pointed out earlier, it's even more of a character study than it is that the plot itself is important.
It is, yeah.
Do you want to take us through some of the details of that plot, Alice?
Very, very briefly, I'll try to keep it brief. I love how the first section of the novel kind of sets up that first story of how the bottom, why the bottom's called the bottom, and how that part of the story sets the stage for so much of the rest of the story. Can I just tell that little story real quick? Do you think we have time for that? Okay. So the first section of the novel, we get that origin story of the bottom. And a white farmer had promised freedom and a piece of bottom land to his slave, one of his slaves, if he would perform some difficult duties, chores for him. And when the slave had completed those difficult tasks, the farmer regretted his side of the bargain. Giving freedom was easy. The farmer had no problem with giving freedom, which is interesting, and we could talk for an hour about that by itself. But he didn't want to give up the land that he had promised. So he tells the slave he's very sorry, but he must give him valley land instead of a piece of the bottom land. That confused the slave. He said he thought the valley land was the bottom land. And the master said, well, no, the land on the hillside is the land that is bottom land, not down in the valley. So he lied. He told him that the hillside land was the bottom land and it was rich and fertile. He's lying. I mean, this sets the stage. And slavery was never practiced in Ohio, but that's where Toni Morrison sets this story, which is very interesting. And it sets the stage. She's illuminating the fact that white people's racism and lives have created a topsy-turvy world for Black people in which up is down and down is up. You know, the valley is one thing, the bottom land and the hillside are reversed in the slave and master story. And a quote from the book is, the white people lived on the rich valley floor, and the Blacks populated the hills above it, taking small consolation in the fact that every day they could literally look down on the white folks. So there's a lot in this book that is hard to read and hard to get through, but it's also beautifully written, and the way that she structures the rest of the novel is basically by highlighting events that happened in certain years. And like you said, the story takes place after World War I, so it really starts out in 1919. And I don't know how much detail you want to go into about the every single chapter in the book, but from 1919 to 1965, is that the last chapter? Is it 65 or 69? I can't remember. Goes through the lives, it's 65, goes through the lives of Nell and Sula and other people in the story. It's actually multi-generational because Nell's parents and Sula's parents and grandparents are in this story too. And so you get the generations in there too, a little bit here and there. So it's really very fascinating that way. I don't know how much, more we want to go into the details of the story, but that was just the little introductory story.
Right. No, that's a great introductory story. Well, maybe would it be a good idea to hit some of the characters?
Yes, definitely.
Wonderful. So we have our title character, Sula. She was raised in a boarding house by her eccentric grandmother and mother.
Mm-hmm.
They are seen as being more free and loose as compared to other members in the community. Sula has a birthmark, and depending on what you think of Sula, then you interpret that birthmark as being something either more positive or negative. Is it a rose? Is it a snake? It's kind of reflected. It's like a work chart test. Is that how you say it? The
Yeah,
import
Rorschach.
test?
Yeah,
Rorschach.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I love that at the very beginning of the book, there's a quote from the Rose Tattoo that Toni Morrison included in the preface parts of her book. I think that's just fabulous. So go ahead.
So Sula is smart. She acts spontaneously. She's impulsive. She leaves the community, goes to college. She kind of wanders and experiences life for 10 years, but then comes back. And after that, she lives a life free of convention. She does stuff that is frowned upon by the community, like, not taking care of her grandmother, having her, well, she takes care of her in a ways, and she has her committed somewhere else.
Yeah, but that wasn't the way you did it back in the day. You were supposed to take care of your elders in their own home or in your home. You weren't supposed to shunt them off to the old folks' home. That was bad. Bad form.
And she also, because she's somewhat of a free lover, she will sleep with pretty much any guy in town and do it. There's a beautiful quote that I did not write down about how by watching her mother when she's a child, that she kind of picks up that sex is something that's frequent, pleasant, and unremarkable. And so that gets her into some trouble with some of the ladies in town, and later on with Nell, because she sleeps with Nell's husband. Now on to Nell. Nell is kind of her soulmate in many ways. She is raised with a more conventional life, very rigid values. You can see as a child that she wants that self-discovery. She's uncertain. She wants a conventional life, and yet she manages to live a very conventional life. And so we see some bonding events that happen between these two girls as they grow. And so that's why I want to introduce you to a character we see only very briefly, but he's pivotal to their development, Chicken Little. And Chicken Little is a neighborhood boy, and one day Sula's playfully swinging him around by his hands. They're by a river. It's both girls together and Chicken Little. She accidentally loses her grip and he falls into the river and drowns. And although they attend the funeral, they don't tell anybody that they know anything, have any association with this death. And so this secret kind of bonds them together. And it also gives Nell, until the very end, a little bit of a sense of superiority to Sula that isn't really merited. Shadrach is another important character. He's a World War II veteran. He's traumatized by the war, and he institutes National Suicide
I just
Day.
love that. Bless his heart.
It's
just so poignant.
It is, and it comes back later. But the idea is that, he is worried that because of all the trauma he's been through, he's tempted on a daily basis to end it all. And so he's thinking, if we just declare one day that, hey, if you're going to commit suicide this year, do it on this day, then the other 364 days of the year, you can say, like, nope, it's not the day for it. And you can live a life that's kind of freer of that sort of mental burden. So that's the theory behind it. And so he starts out as a joke, but it kind of becomes something accepted by the community. They kind of play into it over time.
They think he's crazy, but it's their kind of crazy. They kind of let that become part of the norm of their, he's trying to find ways to fit into the norm of pre-war life that he no longer feels connected to. And, that's one of his coping mechanisms. And the town kind of, thinks he's crazy and all that, but they accept that. And they do sort of kind of almost respect him in a way for his crazy idea,
Well, he's got this Suicide Day thing that, as you said, Sarah, the town, I think they even have parades on that day, or they all come to the street and they're lined up and down the sidewalk and everything. And even though it's this deathness that brings them all together, the undercurrent is it's a celebration of living, because they've got those
and community
days that's, it's not there. So it you mentioned the term topsy-turvy, and that's just one of the pieces to the topsy-turviness of it. where it's so accepting and without you have an initial opinion, but there's no judgment with the opinion,
Right.
because it is just a part of the livelihood. You go and watch the parade on Suicide Day,
And the whole town sees Shadrach in a topsy-turvy way because while they all get in the spirit of National Suicide Day and everything, but they don't really, a lot of them don't, they can't really bond with Shadrach himself. He's not very nice to people. He's known for being, he curses at children and white people, and he commits regular acts of indecency, and he's a difficult person because of his PTSD and all that. But he also manages to do odd jobs and sell fish to the townspeople, and they, have rallied with National Suicide Day. So he sort of is begrudgingly woven into the fabric of the town, if you will. And that's the town's version of acceptance. And
they don't shun him, they don't hide him, they don't force him away. He is a part of it, and there's an embracing to that.
And there's such an interesting thing about the structure of Toni Morrison's book, is because immediately after we learn all that about Shadrach, that's when we get introduced in the next couple chapters, 1920 and 1921, we get introduced to Sula and Nell's two families, and the town, and how the town sees those two families and all that kind of thing. And so there's all this kind of, I don't want to say mirroring, but there's some similarities to Shadrach's place in the town and other things that happen with other characters like Sula and Nell throughout the story, and their families. And so it's even though when you're reading it, you just feel like you're flowing along this warm, soft river of beautiful prose, there's actually incredibly intelligent and well-written structuring going on with this story.
Yeah. There's definitely Shadrach in all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see it as very circular. I mean, the end line speaks of circles and circles of sorrow, and the structure is very circles and circles of
come back
themes.
around to things. Yeah. And
absolutely. And I just want to point out really quickly about Shadrach, and as you very well pointed out, that he is kind of accepted into the town even though he's an outlier. That's another theme of this book, is how far off the norm can you be and still be accepted by your community? And at what point do you cross that line?
What has crossed the line? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Which circles back to the origin story and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and I think it's so interesting that the parts of the book that have Nell and Sula and Chicken Little, the children, when the characters are children, and at that point Shadrach's not a child. He's 21, 25, something like that, when he comes back from war, when Sula and Nell are children. And so you get to see these two girls bond as friends in childhood, and that's the premise for the rest of their relationship. And like you said, there are significant things that happen in their childhood that both color and kind of almost, I don't want to say predict, but there's a destiny to their ups and downs in their friendships that in hindsight, once you've read the book, you say, oh yeah, I should have known that when I read about their childhood. So next up, we continue our discussion of Sula by Toni Morrison.